What is the maximum amount of sugar that you can have in a single day before you start having negative side effects? I want you to think of your sugar capacity as like a bucket, okay? And you can fill this bucket up with sugar. And as long as you're occasionally dumping the bucket out, you can add sugar in. But if you add a bunch of sugar into this bucket and you never dump the bucket out, and the sugar gets a chance to get to the top and overflow, when you're overflowing is when you experience the bulk of the side effects. So everyone has a different sized bucket, and the purpose of this video is to help you learn what size your bucket is, but also how much sugar fills your bucket. So this video is nicely broken down into sedentary category, average category, and active category. And not one single category defines you as a person. You can have periods of your life where you're more active, periods of your life where you're more sedentary. You know what's really scary? If you look historically, 1776, the average American consumed about 4 pounds of sugar in a year. Then in 1850, the average human in America consumed about 20 pounds of sugar per year. In 1994, 120 pounds of sugar per year, alongside becoming more and more sedentary. This coincides with obviously diabetes, other issues, cardiovascular issues. So we know sugar's not a good thing, but it's all a delicate balance. Now, there's different kinds of sugar. So when you look on a label, you do need to be careful because it's not just going to outright say sugar sometimes. Okay, sometimes you're going to see things like dextrin or dextrose. You're going to see fructose sometimes. You're going to see high fructose corn syrup. You're going to see maltodextrin. You're going to see various rice syrups like white rice syrup or brown rice syrup. You'll also see corn syrup or corn syrup solids. Okay, these things are sugar, and they may not show on the nutrition fact as sugar. It might just show as a carbohydrate. So make sure you're watching this stuff. Now, let's just jump right into what you might feel if you're having too much sugar, because you need to understand the feelings first before we get to the specific amounts. So I'll break down literally how many grams you should have, but you need to know what it feels like. The first obvious one is the weight gain piece. If you're gaining weight, that's an obvious one. But puffiness, specifically in the face, okay? You'll notice if you go overboard on sugar one day, you might feel puffier in the face. If you are urinating a lot, okay, if you're running to the bathroom, this isn't just a sign of insulin resistance or diabetes, just having excess sugar can do this as well. If you start noticing that your joints are hurting more, this is a telltale symptom, simply because there is definitely evidence that suggests that sugar can lead to an inflammatory response, especially when that bucket isn't being emptied. Feeling fatigued, okay, and I'm not just talking about a blood sugar crash, I'm talking flat out having a hard time getting motivated. I notice even during the holidays, if I have more sugar, it's harder for me to get motivated. It doesn't give me the energy like some people say it does. It demotivates me, and that's because it's affecting serotonin, it's affecting neurotransmitters, it's affecting the brain. Okay, and finally, trouble sleeping. This is definitely one that comes to be. I notice it a lot, especially if I have sugar in the evening time. Okay, so let's say you're an active person. Let's talk about this. How much sugar can you get away with having per day? This is the one category where you have to do a tiny bit of math. Now, don't get scared. You can skip ahead to the next section, but I think this is important because if you are having a period of your life where you're active, this is important. So when you exercise, your amount of sugar that you burn is dependent upon how intense your training or your workout is, or your exercise. If you were to exercise at 100% capacity, 100% intensity, you would be utilizing 100% carbohydrates, but not many people are exercising at 100% intensity. So what you want to do is you want to figure how hard were you working out and how long. So it looks like this. 1 gram of carbohydrates, or 1 gram of sugar, has 4 calories. So if you went out on a run, or you went on the elliptical and you burned 400 calories, in simple math, if you were working at 100% intensity, that would equal 100 grams of sugar. That would imply you could burn 100 grams of sugar. Here's the problem. You're not training at 100%, right? So you want to consider the percentage of your intensity. If you were working out at 75% intensity, you burned 75% carbs. If you were working at 50% intensity, you burned 50% carbs. So a simple example is yesterday I went for a 1-hour run and my Apple Watch said I burned about 400 calories. So that would be 100 grams of sugar at 100%. But I was running at about 50% intensity. It was a slow jog, okay? So when I do the math there, say, well, 50% of 100 grams of sugar, that's 50 grams of sugar. That means that generally speaking, I could consume 50 grams of sugar on that day before I start getting the negative side effects. Very simply speaking. Did I consume that 50 grams of sugar? No, I didn't. It doesn't mean you have to. It just gives you that allowance. Now, what I'm trying to instill here is the understanding that sugar, or carbohydrates really in general, need to be thought of as a fuel. There's no reason, absolutely no reason for you to have sugar above and beyond what your workout needs were. So that's how you factor things in. If you were working at 25% intensity, it would have only been 25% or 25 grams, if that makes sense. Now let's move into a sedentary category, because now we look at this bucket and we remember, okay, if I'm filling this bucket, but I'm never getting a chance to dump it out with exercise, it's filling up quickly and it's overflowing quickly, which means a sedentary person is much more likely to experience the negative side effects of sugar than an active person. What you have to remember is that when you consume sugar and you're spiking your insulin, this insulin is stopping fat loss from occurring, okay? Because insulin blunts that response. But the elevated levels of insulin are also encouraging that sugar to go into a fat cell. Yes, that can make you gain weight. Yes, that can make you fat. But worse than that, it can trigger these fat cells to release inflammatory cytokines, and you have inflammation. So what you experience as a sedentary person when you overdo the sugar, you experience much more in the way of joint pain, much more in the way of brain fog, much more in the way of just general fatigue. You're gonna feel it probably in your lower back, you're gonna feel it in your hips, you're gonna feel it in places that active people might not, because they are incinerating those sugars and you are piling them over, and that excess has a more profound effect. But there is something that you can also do if you're sedentary to manipulate the timing of the sugar a little bit. Not giving you a license to have a bunch, but I want to generally say that if you're sedentary, you should not exceed 25 grams of sugar. Now we're talking sugar, not carbs, okay? No more than 25 grams of sugar. You can possibly get away with a little bit more if you consume it in the morning. Here's an interesting study. It was published in the journal Scientific Reports. They took 2 groups of people, okay? And they had one group consume high carbohydrates in the morning until 3:30 p.m., and then they switched to low carb, high fat in the afternoon. The other group went high fat in the morning and high carb in the afternoon. What they found is that the overall glucose levels were 7.9% higher throughout the entire day when carbohydrates were ingested in the evening or afternoon. They also found that those that had the carbs in the afternoon had much worse glucose tolerance, which means they had less ability to handle sugar. One of the things that I do if I'm craving something sweet and I don't want to have sugar, I use those LMNT electrolyte packets because they're sweet, but they're salty. There's something called an NST neuron that's in our brain, and it receives a signal from salt. And when salt hits that signal or triggers that signal, it can actually make it so we're not craving sugar. These sugar cravings are some of the toughest things to beat. And the way that I've combated this is by having salt, by having electrolytes. Now, the nice thing with the LMNT packets is they are also sweet. You can get unflavored ones, but they have like a lemon lime, a citrus salt, they have lemon habanero, they have chocolate salt. So you're talking 5 calories or less, and something that you can sip on that kind of gives you that satisfaction that you're having something sweet. So I popped the link down below. It gets you a free sample pack along with purchase. So that way you try it out, but you also get an entire variety pack along with your purchase. So you can give it to a friend. That way you can share it with people and kind of turn them onto it, or you can just be greedy and enjoy all the different flavors yourself. So that website is drinklmnt.com/Thomas. So drinklmnt.com/Thomas. It is definitely a way to kick the sugar. Highly, highly recommend it. So that link's in the top line of the description underneath this video. So pretty profound. What this means is that if you're going to have sugar, it's better to allocate it in the morning. So the 25, maybe 30 grams of sugar for a sedentary person, You'd want to have that in the morning. You have more flexibility having it in the morning. This is simply because of circadian cues. We have genes in our body that are aligned with daylight, aligned with the time, things like that. So that's why you start to notice these things. So if you're starting to have carbohydrates too late in the day, you'll get brain foggy, you'll get fatigued, you'll get that joint pain. If you have it earlier in the day, you're more likely to burn it and more likely to dump that bucket out. Now, the average person, which is where most people are going to fall into this category. This is people that maybe exercise a little bit in the morning, but then they're sedentary the rest of the day. Or maybe they get up and move around a fair bit throughout the day. Maybe, a good example would be a stay-at-home mom or someone that works a moderately active job where you're moving, but you're not necessarily training hard. The recommended amount of sugar would be 35-ish grams on the high side. And this actually falls right in line with the recommended daily allowance, which I usually don't align with. But in this particular case, I think that's reasonable. Full disclaimer, I think you should probably just cut out the sugar. I don't think it should be there. But if you're looking for that upper limit, 35 is where I would really be. After that, you'll start to notice the symptoms. What's interesting is that as you're moving around throughout the day, you have ability to use that glucose. So exercise uses a very finite amount, a very distinct amount, but moving throughout the day uses kind of just a liberally loose amount of carbs just for general movement. But more than just burning up the carbs, you're getting them out of the bloodstream. So it's good just to move around in general. There was a recent paper that came out that actually suggested that if you exercise in the morning, but then you're sedentary the rest of the day, it's almost as bad as just being sedentary all the time. And that's not to take the wind out of your sail with the exercise in the morning, it's to encourage you to move throughout the day. You get more amnesty to consume carbs and sugar if you move throughout the day. So how do you know you're overdoing it if you're an average person? The average person that's not sedentary, that doesn't experience like the immediate joint pain and stuff like that, you're gonna notice initially trouble sleeping when you're starting to have too much sugar. You're gonna also notice a diminished sex drive. This is a pretty common complaint that people talk about. Too much sugar, they start feeling like their libido goes down for men and women. They definitely find it harder to get motivated. Even though I consider myself an athlete sometimes, I also consider myself somewhat average, just given my daily life. And I notice that if I have too much sugar, like I mentioned earlier, you're satisfying these dopamine receptors so much, it's like being on a drug. And then when the drug removes, well, then you're left with this need for it. So it's harder to get motivated without it. It's just like caffeine, right? So your brain is looking for this hit and it's not getting it. Okay, so I find when I start having too much sugar, it's harder to get motivated. It takes me more energy to get going. And in your situation with this, if this starts to happen, one of the best things that you can do is honestly just go cold turkey and cut off the sugar. Because once it starts impacting your brain as an addiction, the best way for this particular addiction is to cut it off. Otherwise, you really just kind of keep on that slippery slope. Now, during the holidays, it can be a little bit tougher because you've got sweet things all over the place. My recommendation is do what you can to burn it. So here we have to wrap it all up. For the active person, it's based upon when and how much you exercise. For the sedentary person, 20 to 25 grams on the top end. For the average person, 35 grams on the top end. Okay, and that's obviously factoring in all this other stuff. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.